Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee workshop. Today we're going to build a folding screen. You may have seen them in a room. You can divide the space of a room, maybe hide a radiator that you don't want to see, perhaps a computer or even a TV. It's just a nice way to divide space. Now, most of the ones that we found were wooden frames with fabric in between, or often translucent panels. But being that we're woodworkers, we wanted one all wood all the time. We found one that we really liked. We'll show you that next. Then we'll come back here and build a folding screen. That's next, right here on the new Yankee workshop. Well, this is a real New York treasure house. This place is filled with wonderful antiques. It's the home of Lee Kino Antiques, and he brings in pieces from everywhere and then offers them for sale. Look at this. Beautiful Queen Anne highboy. Beautiful brasses, nice elegant Queen Anne legs. Really a classic piece. And over here, a real piece of antiquity. This Windsor chair called a comb-back Windsor chair because of the way the spindles come up through the back. And this table, you better have a big pocketbook if you want to buy this. It's really rare. It's a drawbar, drop leaf table, very old, and you can just imagine all the meals that were taken at this table. Now here's the piece I wanted you to see. It's a wooden room screen made out of wood that is pine. And what I want you to notice are the panels, these raised panels, a long narrow panel, a smaller panel in the middle, and another long panel. I really like that look. There's a great idea here. We'll take some photographs, go back to the shop, and build one of our own. Well, here's our version of a folding screen. I made ours 60 inches high, and each panel is 16 inches wide. There are 3 panels, although you could add more, but the piece will start to get heavy. The side you'll see the most has raised panels. There are 3 panels surrounded by rails and stiles that have a little molded edge. The panels pivot on these special hinges, which allow you to set it up in any configuration you like. And the back is a little simpler. It's a flat panel, square edges, no molding. If you'd like to build your own folding screen, a measured drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Building the panels for this screen is a great exercise in woodworking. These techniques are used in building furniture, cabinets. You can even panel a room once you learn how to make panels like this. Let me show you some of the parts. The rails and stiles get a groove and this decorative edge. The ends of the rails are coped, so they fit together like this. And once you put glue on all those surfaces, that's a really strong joint. We have a raised panel which sits in the groove. And you can make this either on the router table or on a table saw, and we'll be showing both of those techniques. It floats in there, it's not glued. Now, one important consideration in this project was that the face of the panel could not be proud of the rails and stiles. Otherwise, the hinges would not work. So I had to use some thicker material. Now, if I pull this apart and slide the panel down, I want to show you what happens if I had used 3/4 inch stock. This represents the 3/4 inch stock, this line. I would have had a very thin piece of material left here, which would have made the piece weak, and it would have been a very tiny reveal. So I decided to use 1 1/8 inch stock. Now that used to be standard material. You could buy 5/4 material. It measured 1 1/8 when you got it. No more. It measures 1 inch, sometimes a little less. So to get the thickness that I wanted, I had to buy 6/4 stock. And you can see it's a little bit thicker. It actually measures about 1 1/4 inches. I could use it this way, but you know what? That makes the piece heavy. We want to make this as light as possible. So I'm going to thin it down. I start by ripping the stock, the width I want, rough width. And if I sight down these, I can see that it's not perfectly flat. There's a little bit of a wave to it. So I'm going to flatten that on the jointer. That's the first step. Before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now I showed you that little curve in the piece earlier, and what we're going to do is we're going to joint one face of this piece to make it flat. Now it's time to make the pieces uniform in thickness, and for that I turn to a surface planer. This is a portable surface planer. They've come a long way from where they were 15 years ago when we first used one of these. They're more powerful. This one has 2 speeds, one for roughing, one for finishing. It has a good height adjustment feature, and you can really lock it in where you want it to be. So we're giving this one a try. Does a pretty nice job. With the faces of our stock complete, we now want to deal with the edges. I want them to be straight and square. If I set this piece on the joiner, you can see that it's hitting down at the end and over here, but there's a gap in the middle, which means it's not straight. I'm not sure if it's square, so I've set my fence to 90 degrees. When we run it through, it'll square it up and straighten it. Now I'm going to set my rip fence to the width I want plus a 32nd of an inch. Place that freshly jointed edge against the fence and rip it. All right, now that 32nd of an inch I left on, we'll take that off at the joiner. All right, nice and square and uniform in thickness. Now we're ready to do something with these pieces. Here are a couple of 1x8s that I've jointed the edges on so they're nice and tight, and I want to glue them together to form one big panel out of which I can cut 3 panels for one section of our folding screen, and all the panels will match. No biscuits on the joint, just glue. However, I'm going to use this brown glue. Same as the yellow carpenter's glue, except it conceals the joint better on these dark woods. And when I clamp these together, I just want to put enough pressure to bring the pieces together. I don't want to squeeze all the glue out of the joint. Now it's time to cut the rails, and I want them to all be exactly the same length. So I use my miter box, which has this adjustable stop which slides up and down this tape measure. The closest I can get the stop to this saw blade is about 18 inches, and I only need a 12 1/8 inch long piece. But if I add a filler like this, and extend the stop, put my piece in, line up the laser with the length I want to cut, I then can cut as many of these as I want, and they all come out exactly the same. Now we're ready to start machining some parts, and this router bit set is sold as a door making set. There's one for doing the stiles, and we're going to start with this one, which I use to cope the ends of the rails. If you look at a rail, it'll go through face side down, and the router bit will cut a negative of that molding profile, and it'll form the tenon. So I have to set it in the router table, fuss with the height, make up a sample, and test it. Now for this sled, which will help me guide these rails through that bit. It's such a narrow piece, it would be impossible and certainly unsafe to guide it through freehand or even with a miter gauge. This sled is made up of a composite base with a stop, a handle, and some grit, which helps hold the workpiece in place. So I slide the sled against the fence, then the workpiece against the fence, and lock it down with this clamp. And that's a very important step, because as this goes through, I don't want it to start moving around. It could kick out. I want to make sure I hold the sled tight to the table and tight against the fence as I run it through. And I take my time. All right, that looks pretty good. That's the test piece. Now we can run the real rails. Now what I have to do is remove this material right down here so that the rails will fit into the stiles. I'm going to do that with the table saw. I'm going to sight down by eye right along this edge, and I'll leave it a little bit long to start, run it through with the stop, and then keep moving the stop over until I get a very precise cut. And that feels pretty good. Let's try it out. Slide it in. Tight on the front, tight on the back. That's it. Now, because I've set the stop on this fence and all the rails are the same length, all the cuts will be perfect. Now we have to change bits, actually put in the complementary bit and run the edges of the rails and stiles. Before I put the bit in, I want to show you what it's going to do for us. We run the pieces face down again, and this bit will cut the profile as well as a groove which will receive the panel and the tenons we just made. So we'll set it in, set the height, run a test piece. One more thing before I run the sample. I want to put a featherboard on. So I take a piece of stock, run it up as close as I can to the fence, put this featherboard on and clamp it in place. And what this will do is keep the stock tight to the table as I run it through, and it also prevents the stock from backing up. Okay, let's check it out now. Yeah, it's close. One more adjustment, I think we'll have it. I'm going to do a quick dry fit here just to see how all these pieces come together, and it looks pretty good. So we'll call it a day for today. Tomorrow we'll show you how to make raised panels, and we'll put all these things together to make our folding screen. Well, good morning. Today I want to start working on the raised panels of our folding screen. We have 3 panels in each section. Now, yesterday we glued up some of this 3/4 inch mahogany to make a blank. And the first thing I want to do this morning is surface plane it to the correct thickness. The goal is to get this piece to 11/16 inch thickness. So I've set the surface planer to a little less than 3/4 of an inch. I'll run one face, then I'll lower it down and run the other face until I get to that thickness. I'm also going to run a piece of scrap. I'm going to need that to test my setup before I raise the panels. Now it's time to cut the panels to length, and I'm going to use our homemade panel cutter. You've seen us use this before. It's real handy when I'm taking big pieces like this and I want to get all the pieces perfectly square. I'm going to square up one end, cut the top panel, label it, then the middle panel, then the bottom panel. I want them all in sequence. Okay, the top panel is 19 11/16. Okay, now I'm going to flip it around, align that mark with my fence, and that'll give me a very accurate cut. Well, now we'll raise a panel using the router station. This is a panel raising bit, a real heavy-duty bit with thick carbide and this ball bearing guide. I'm going to set it in the router, tighten it down, and I'm going to slow the router speed down to its slowest speed. This is a big bit. I don't want it spinning too fast. Now I've made some adjustments. Let's check it. Perfect. Let's run the panels. All right. A nice raised panel. just made a test cut to raise a panel using a jig on the table saw. Now let me show you the jig details. There's a tall panel which is perpendicular to the table saw surface, and on the back side I've mounted 2 pieces of plywood which wrap over the fence. I want those to be snug. I don't want this to be sloppy as I push the panel through the saw blade. There's also a stop back here against which I set the panel to give it support as I run it through. And then I have these slots if I need a clamp to hold the panel in place. The blade is tipped to 20 degrees. Now I'm ready to run a panel. Now that does a pretty good job. It will require a little sanding before assembly, but this system works great. Let's take another look at our prototype. While doing our research, we noticed that a lot of the screens had a flat bottom, and that can be trouble on an uneven floor. It's very unstable. So what I decided to do is cut out a little bit of an arch, and that creates these feet on which the panels sit, and it makes it easier to set up and more stable. Now here's the lower rail, all machined for one of our panels. And here's a template I made of the cutout. Mark it and cut it out at the bandsaw. Before I do any assembly, I want to do some pre-sanding. It's a lot easier to do it now than when the piece is assembled. So all the raised panels, I'm going to sand the beveled edge, whether it was done with the router or the table saw with a block of wood and some fine sandpaper. The bigger surfaces I can do with my random orbit sander. I also want to take the time to grab all the rails and stiles, and you can see planer marks, little wavy marks. But with a block of wood and some sandpaper, I can smooth it out in a few seconds. Also, there's little ridges on the edge of the groove, so I just hold the block on an angle and knock those off. It's a lot easier to do it now than when the piece is assembled. Well, finally I'm ready for some assembly. And I took the time to build a jig to do the assembly. That'll ensure that everything is nice and square and located in the right place. It's a piece of 5/8 CDX plywood with some 1/4-inch stops that I located in the exact place that I want the pieces. Here's one for the top rail. Here's some pairs for this intermediate rail. Another one here. Once I start applying the glue, I don't have a lot of time to line these up, so this jig really simplifies that process. Now, I want to mark where to apply the glue. So I'm just going to put a pencil mark at each location. I'm going to stay away from this molded edge because if the glue squeezes out there, it's going to be tough to clean up. I'll mark all the intersections, and then I'll be ready to apply some glue. Once again, I'm using some of this brown tinted glue, and that'll make it easier to disguise the glue joint once it's dry. Just a thin coat on both sides of the joint. Well, it's taken me a while to put all the glue on these joints. We have 8 joints to deal with, about 5 minutes or so. And this is where the jig comes in real handy. Now I don't even have to think about where the pieces go. I just slip them together. Okay, now I can slide in the panels. And those are dry. No glue in those grooves. Okay, and now the other style. Okay, now we're ready for a clamp. Okay, a couple more clamps. Set this one aside to dry and build the other 2. Here again, you can see the advantages of a panel cutter. It's the easiest way to square up the bottom of these panels. Now an 1/8 inch radius bit helps round over all the sharp corners. Now it's time for the hinges. I've clamped 2 doors together face to face. I'm going to take some folded over sandpaper here and just put a slight space between the 2 doors, less than a 1/16 of an inch. Now these hinges are referred to as double action hinges or folding screen hinges. I set them in the center of the 2 doors and pre-punch for the holes, pre-drill and attach with the screws. Well, there it is. One folding mahogany screen, ready for the finishing room. For a finish on our folding screen, I want to make this mahogany look a little bit richer. So we're using a red mahogany oil-based stain, and I put it on fairly liberally and wipe off the excess. If I want it a little bit darker, I can put on a second coat. After the stain dried, I applied a coat of wax-free shellac to seal the wood, and then sanded it with some 220 paper. Now the problem with mahogany is that it has pores, and if you don't fill the pores when you put your final coats of finish on, you get these dimples. So the way to solve that problem is to use a filler. This is an oil filler. Dab it on, rub it with the grain. It's almost like shoe polish. Sort of cover it over, making sure you fill in all those tiny little pores. And when it dries to a haze, we'll clean off the excess with some burlap. Now that the filler has hazed over, take a piece of burlap, and I'm going to keep rolling it around, and go against the grain. And what I'm doing here is actually forcing the filler into those pores, and at the same time removing any excess filler that's on the surface. After I get the whole piece complete, I'll let it set for a day or so, and then sand it lightly with 320 paper to get rid of any filler that might be on the surface, and then we'll be ready for the final protective coat. Now at this point our mahogany room panel is looking pretty good, but we still have a very soft finish. What I'm doing now is wiping on some satin poly, and this will give us the protection that we need. It's easiest to put on with a rag, wipe it on, smooth it out, let it dry. A couple coats should do the job. Well, here it is, our folding room screen with several coats of hard-wearing wipe-on polyurethane. This is the perfect accessory for any fine room, and not too bad to build, so I hope you'll build one as well. For next time, how about a complete change of pace and outdoor project? This flower stand, it's made up in sections, a quarter section on the end here, a straight section in the middle, another quarter section down here. 3 layers, completely made of wood and painted with a tough exterior paint, so it should last for many years. And fun to build. So join me next time and build a flower stand with us right here in the New Yankee Workshop.
If you enjoyed this New Yankee project, please visit our website at newyankee.com for a complete online catalog of all the other projects you've seen Norm build here in the New Yankee Workshop.